Thanks all for joining us this morning for the Minnesota PRSA Career Coffee event here on the last day, leap year in February. And we have a great panel, I think, as evidenced by the number of signups we have for this coffee. So I think we're going to have a vigorous discussion. It's meant to be pretty low key and casual. So a couple of logistical things, since there are quite a few people joining here. If you have a question, let's put it either in the chat, or if you raise your hand using the reactions function, that we will have your mic activated so you can ask the question if you would like to. Otherwise, I think we're going to mostly keep people muted just to keep the background noise down. And we'll let the panel here introduce themselves in a second. If you're not familiar with Minnesota PRSA, it's the premier public relations professionals association here in the Twin Cities. What are we up to for membership? I forget now, 200 and some, 300 and some. I lose track, but it's a small but representative group of the marketplace here in Minnesota, and excited to have this conversation because I think we're in a time where there's been a lot of career movement. So with that, I think I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves, and I will go last. So do we want to start with, let's see, who's first on my list here? Scott, you're the first one that shows up on my list. So do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here and looking forward to the conversation. My name is Scott Blake. I'm an employment attorney at the Fellhaber Larson Law Firm. I primarily work with companies and also individuals in any range of employment issue, which includes executive compensation agreements, non-competes, non-solicits, that type of thing, and have a lot of experience dealing with people when they're coming and going in between companies. So good morning, everyone.
Great. Jenny, you're next on my moving from left to right. Do you want to go next?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jenny Gradson. I'm very excited to be here today. Thanks for having me. Also excited for the conversation. I'm a SVP of People, which is Human Resources for Weber Shandwick. Have been in PR with Weber for 13 years, supporting different markets and currently supporting the US and Canada, and full cycle employee experience. So anything from offers to the employee experience, performance plans, and performance issues, and then, when people leave, exiting from the agency. So very excited to speak with you today and answer questions.
Very good. And Sue, that leaves you last, but
Last
definitely
but not least.
Yes.
I'm Sue Serna. Hi, everyone. So I started my career as a newspaper reporter covering retail and consumer trends. And then I switched to the new and exciting world of social media and ended up here in town at Cargill, where I was the global director of social media for several years. I left Cargill a couple years ago and started my own company, Serna Social, where I work with a lot of companies and a lot of people on security, infrastructure, governance, process, procedure, making sure you're compliant. So I spend a lot of time thinking about legal things. And I also serve as an advisory committee member on the National Institute for Social Media. So pretty much can answer any question about social.
Oh, we're counting on it. And hi, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Joel Swanson. I lead marketing and communications for Affinity Plus Federal Credit Union, which I've been doing for about 5 years. I am a past president of Minnesota PRSA, and I see several of my past president colleagues here on the call. So I expect the really toughest questions from this group. And I also happen to be the ethics officer for the chapter this year. So my contribution here will be weighing in on some, personal and professional ethics sort of considerations. So with that, while you guys all start entering in thinking of questions, why don't we kick off by looking at a couple of the situations throughout a career and maybe dig deeper with each of the perspectives we have here. Let's start with, those that are at the stage of looking for a job or about to accept an offer. What should they be looking at? Jenny, how about we start off with you as someone whose people are on the other side of the desk. What kinds of things should we be looking at, or should people be considering as they're getting getting ready to accept an offer or start a new position?
So when you get the offer, hopefully at that point you've had lots of conversations with the recruiter. You know, there's a lot of wage transparency out there. So you have the ability to see what an average range might be for the role. So you have an idea going into it. So hopefully when you get the offer, there's not a vast difference or delta between what you're looking for and what the offer is made. And I would look at the offer. I tell people to look at the offer like they're reading it for their best friend. And so if you're reading the offer letter for your best friend, what are questions that you might want your friend to ask? What are things that you might want them to consider? What are some things that might not be in the offer letter that maybe they've talked to you about, or the recruiters talked to you about, that you would want maybe memorials in the letter? Do they have it in the letter that, when is your next review date? Is there a bonus structure? What about, your paid time off? What does that look like? Is it accrued? How do you get it? So some of those things, just to make sure everything is codified in writing and you know what you're getting into as much as possible. If there's a specific client that you are said that you're going to be working with, if you want that written in there, just to make sure that, as much of the knowns are known and there's an agreed to, in the offer letter as possible.
Okay. Are there any things they shouldn't do, or any faux pas that you've seen that come to mind when it comes to that transactions?
So, at the time that it gets to the offer stage, obviously the company is very excited about you. Hopefully you're also excited about the company. And so if there are additional considerations that you want, I would be realistic about it. I understand that there's an adage out there that, you never know until you ask. But I think that also can rub a wrong way. If you get an offer for $50,000 and you're like,
Mhm.
I was really looking for 100, like, probably not a good time during the offer to make that known. And so if there are things there's a big disagreement about, or, just a big delta, discuss that along the way with the recruiter. So when you get to the offer stage, it doesn't look like you're surprising them or that you're, coming back with unrealistic expectations.
No, that makes sense. I've seen that too, where people are afraid to talk about money early, and then by the
Mhm.
time they get to the back and forth on the offer, they're so far apart that they never should have gotten that far, in the
Right.
first place. So
Yeah.
that's good advice. Scott, how about from a legal perspective? What are your thoughts on what the people should be considering, or what should be on their checklist for?
Yeah, for sure. And I sort of echo Jenny's comments of like, if it's not clear, raise a question, right? Because maybe their offer letter has, some type of, it's not addressing something, or maybe there's some confusing language. The same thing if you're presented with an employment contract of some sort. If something doesn't make sense, certainly try to get some clarity on it. If the new employer is asking you to sign an employment agreement, it's perfectly acceptable for you to have an attorney, like to retain an attorney and have an attorney look at that. No employer is going to be concerned that you're going to go through that due diligence of going through an employment contract. If it's a straightforward contract and you read it and you sort of understand it and you say, okay, all this makes sense, then maybe you don't need to. But, I just had someone call me, on Monday saying, I've got this thing, there's all this stuff in here that I don't even understand what this means. It's talking about deferred compensation and all this confusing tax stuff. I don't know what this means. Please take a look at it. Right. And it's just, it's a couple hours on my part to work through with the person, try to explain everything. And then if there's confusing stuff in there, then there's always an opportunity to go through and like make proposed revisions to it. And, usually again, it's not trying to like up the comp from 50 to 100, but if it's a confusing agreement, if there's stuff in there that, doesn't make sense, it's an opportunity, and it's not a total red flag. I don't think if you're making smaller tweaks like that, it's not a total red flag to an employer that you would have some revisions to the employment agreement. And then the other thing is, thinking about, okay, so in that employment agreement, what are the restrictions that they're trying to put on you? So are they trying to put a non-compete on you or non-solicit? There's typically confidentiality obligations that are pretty straightforward. But effective July 1st in Minnesota, non-competes are now invalid. Non-solicits, so non-solicitation of customers, those are generally enforceable. So you want to look at that and make sure you understand that. And then the reverse, if you're subject to a non-solicit or non-compete, a lot of the times you want to tell your new employer that so that they know that they can fashion a position for you that's not in breach of those obligations, right? And then sometimes in either in the offer letter or an employment agreement, sometimes you even work in some type of provisions that sort of acknowledge that you're subject to these restrictions. So for example, if you have a non-solicit, so I'm working for an ad agency and I have a non-solicit that says I can't talk to those customers or the customers I've dealt with at the ad agency, and I'm going to a new ad agency, you could put something in there saying like, we all acknowledge that I'm subject to a non-solicit and that I'm not going to, for whatever the restricted period is, call upon my old clients, right? And the employer probably wants that protection in there because if you violate it, they may want to terminate you. But it's easy. It's better to have sort of transparency on those type of issues too. So that's something that I look for. But I think overall, it's like if you have questions about stuff or if it's confusing, if there's a complicated compensation structure with commissions or deferred comp or something like that, and it doesn't make sense, I'd ask the question and get clarification at the front end rather than just saying, I got to set this offer and I'll figure it out later. So those are the things that I'm thinking of, if I'm going into a new company.
You mentioned that law change. That's news to me. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, for sure. So July 1st, 2023, so last July, the Minnesota legislature passed a law that prohibits non-competes in the state of Minnesota. So a non-compete is defined as essentially any agreement that prohibits you from prohibits you from working for a competitor in a certain geographical area or for a particular time period. Compare that to a non-solicit, which is, you can't solicit our customers for the new company. That's still enforceable in most situations. So the non-competes are now invalid. And then another issue that you get into is, so say if you work for a national company, so say you have a company that's headquartered in New York, but you work here in Minnesota, that employment contract may have a New York choice of law provision, but the Minnesota statute says that if you're in Minnesota and you're doing the work in Minnesota, you can't have that choice of law basically kick out and ignore the Minnesota non-compete statute.
Okay. Oh, wow. Complicated.
Yeah. So yeah, a big change
Okay.
last year. So.
Okay, cool.
Mhm.
All right, so switching gears a little bit, Sue, how about just from an online reputation standpoint? I know when we were pre-meeting, you had lots of examples of
Always.
of things that have gone wrong. But what so how can people protect their reputations online, and what are you seeing happening in that space?
Yeah, great. I mean, great broad question, right? I mean, the bottom line is you have to remember that everything online is online for everyone. And even if you're sharing it in a private group or in a direct message with one other individual, you have to always remember those things can still be shared. They can still be documented in a screenshot. They can still be sent to somebody else that you did not intend to see it, right? That's the private stuff. Then the public stuff, I mean, I think we've gotten away from people making blatant, stupid comments on social media that might affect a job offer, but it has happened. One of the most famous examples, this is probably 15 years ago, was a woman was offered a job from the company Cisco, and she tweeted something along the lines of, I don't really want this job, but the pay is good, so I'm going to take it. And the company withdrew the offer. So, be very mindful when you are in the job seeking and job negotiating process of what you're putting out there, not just on LinkedIn, but all your personal social media, right? Remember that with the kind of crossover that happens between personal and private in our lives now, my guess is that a lot of people on this phone call have Facebook friends who are people they either do or have worked with, right? So people from your professional social circle have been given access to your personal social media, and you have to be really mindful about what you're posting, even on accounts that are more private, because you still have people from your professional world in there, right? So you want to be very, very mindful. I mean, I think this call is a good example. I see lots of familiar faces and some faces that I don't know, right? And so I think that you have to be very mindful about how small the universe really is and how digital the universe really is. Things can be captured, things can be shared. Don't say stupid things. Also, don't, use your common sense. Don't post things that are like, here I am partying at the club at 2 a.m., right? Unfortunately, those things are personal events, but they can impact the way people view you professionally if they're part of your professional universe, right? So always be mindful of what you're posting, but especially if you're in the job seeking, job negotiating process, know that everything you post should be PG-13.
All right.
I think it's probably worth just noting, okay, so like if you post something,
Mm.
I guess what types of things can an employer either pull an offer from or fire you for based on what you post, even if it, let's just say it doesn't even deal with work, right?
Right.
And so this stuff came up, whatever, a couple of years ago when what was it, like the rallies where people were attending, then people started to get fired for attending some of like the
Right.
Trump rallies. So generally speaking, there's no laws that prohibit an employer from taking an action, except for if it falls into a few classes, right? If it's some type of protected speech, like talking about, your religious beliefs, or, something like that. And then the other would be like if it's like protected activity under the National Labor Relations
Mhm.
Act, like talking about your wages or any concerted activity or union activity at your current employer, that's protected under
Mhm.
the law. But other stuff, so, partying or political speech, stuff like that, that's not protected, is religious beliefs or protected activity, that runs the risk of being essentially unprotected conduct, meaning an employer could potentially take action against you because of that stuff.
Great
So
point. And it made me think of one more thing. Also, be very cognizant of the company that you are hoping to be employed by. If they are in a regulated industry, there are all kinds of rules and regulations about what they can say. So pharma, travel, medical, right?
Mhm.
All of those industries, you have to be very, very mindful about what you post because those companies' social media policies may be very restrictive. They may say employees can't post at all about work. They may say employees can't identify themselves on their social media profiles as an employee of our company. There are some companies that go that far in their official social policy. So if you don't know what the policy is at your new company, don't just start posting. You may be violating it, especially if you're in a regulated industry.
All right, good stuff. I guess from an ethical standpoint, I would just add, make sure that you check out that organization too from a corporate social responsibility standpoint. Make sure you're comfortable with, if they have had regulatory issues. If it's I've been in healthcare and finance most of my career. I can usually go find, the regulator issues if they have them. A lot of those things are public. And making sure, because if you attach yourself to an organization, your reputation is going to forever be attached to being part of that organization. And so it's okay to have an eye towards protecting your reputation and saying, okay, if and every organization has problems, but it's like, are you okay, being associated with some of those things that come along with the organization that you're going to be joining. And I tell people, especially people younger in their career, we have a lot of, seems like more seasoned folks here. And I think we've all figured this out of, ask those questions early and often. You're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you, and make sure you get answers to some of the questions around things like what are those policies and what are the regulatory expectations and some of those kinds of things that you need to know ahead of time. And I also like to add in, I think I like it when people ask questions about the onboarding process so that they're already thinking about what do I need to do to get up to speed quickly and how will that look? And so that's a question that I've started inserting at times. In fact, I bring it up now when I'm interviewing others for positions just to make sure that I can, get them up to speed because to Sue's comment about the regulatory stuff, if they're not familiar with HIPAA and they're coming into a HIPAA environment, that needs to be part of an expectation. That's part of that training is part of the onboarding process or whatever it is for whatever industry. So, so good stuff. Any questions at this point? I'll pause and let folks ask about this stage before we move on. Come on, drink your coffee, guys. Let's go. That's all right. Those of you that know me know I can keep talking and asking questions all day. We can make this work. Oh, Eva's got a question. If training is required, should that be written into the agreement? I don't know, Jenny or Scott, have you seen that?
I don't know if training necessarily be written into the agreement, but if there is a certain certification that somebody needs to have or a test they need to pass, that would be more than likely, depending on the industry, a condition upon employment. You know, you've got to be a CPA to have this job, for example. So I could see that written in as a condition, but I don't know if training necessarily otherwise would be written in. Maybe a best practice, but maybe not in the offer letter.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think, go ahead, Scott.
No, I don't see it too often in the offer letter, but if there's something additional training or even like during employment, if they're going to pay for or cover, you know, whatever your continuing education, stuff like that, that's something that you want to probably see in an offer letter.
Yeah, okay. A couple of examples that have come up in my workplace that I've seen are Salesforce, like Marketing Cloud certification kind of stuff, because that's a tool that a lot of folks in our industry use. And it is pretty technical. And so if you're looking for somebody who's going to be an administrator, I have put that as a requirement in the job description. I don't think we've put it in the offer letter per se, but it's almost always worded, you know, either you have that or you're, you know, seeking to get that certification. Another one I've seen recently is Agile certification for project management kind of stuff. So it does come up, but I don't think at the offer letter level. All right. Thanks, Eva, for breaking the ice on the questions. Good job. All right. Should we move on then? So let's get past the starting a new job. Let's talk about if you're established. You're not necessarily looking for a job, but what kinds of things should you be doing, you know, when you're set in a position, when you're building that experience in a job, and you know, what should you be doing? Maybe you're not planning to leave, but how do you, you know, audit your career needs, and what should you be doing to protect yourself just in that stage of life? And I really didn't have someone to call on there. I don't know if want to.
It can happen. I have some ideas about
Yeah.
this. So, one thing that I think is interesting that people can do is to go to Indeed or go to the web and Google your title and and you can pull different job descriptions, or you can pull different postings and see what else outside of your company, what else is required of those roles in the world, right? And if there's skills that you don't have, maybe there's skills that you look into to grow or build or strengthen. But it gives you a perspective outside of the world. I think sometimes we, you know, can stay with agencies or places for a long period of time for a variety of wonderful reasons. But then, you know, we don't necessarily make ourselves marketable or, you know, in tune to what's going on outside of our bubble. And so I think that's certainly one way to see. I think another way to do an audit of your skills and where you are is to get a mentor and just ask. You know, get somebody who's more senior or get somebody even who's more junior and say, you know, what are some things that you're seeing? What's interesting to you? What are you reading? Can you look at my resume? What's missing? And just get an outside perspective.
Oh, I like that.
From a social perspective, I would say the biggest mistake I see kind of people who are established in a role make is they don't touch their LinkedIn profile. They don't touch it for years, you know, and that's if they had one to begin with that has more than like the little person icon and like their name, right? So number one is make sure your LinkedIn profile is complete, that it looks professional, that it has a picture of you that actually looks like you, those kinds of things, right? If it looks like you graduated from college and you're in your 50s, you probably want to update that picture, right? So you want to make sure that it's representative of who you are in your current role at your current stage of your career. And you want to brag a little, which is really hard for Minnesotans. Can I tell you? Like, I'm from Philadelphia originally. This is not a problem on the East Coast, but you have to toot your own horn. And so one of the biggest mistakes I see people make is they have a picture in their profile and then they have no information. They have no words. It's just company job title. Remember that LinkedIn is one of the highest ranking websites in the Google search algorithm, right? So the more words you put in your profile, the more likely it is that if somebody Googles social media expert, you're going to come up, right? So if you care at all about, you know, being a thought leader, being a professional who is asked to speak on a panel, right? If you care at all about being, you know, a big deal, you should definitely take some time to improve your LinkedIn profile because it will help people find you, right? And I would love if people would at least once a year update that profile. New skills, new words, right? New bullet points about a big project that you managed or a big thing that you accomplished, right? Make a note in your calendar, update it at least once a year. And if people are interested, shameless self-plug, on my website, there's a video of a webinar I did that you can watch for free called Perfecting Your LinkedIn Profile. And it walks you through how to make your LinkedIn profile better, especially if you have a person icon.
One thing I've seen around this that on LinkedIn is I recommend to people, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, Sue, but is getting those recommendations from colleagues while you're at that workplace along the way, because sometimes if you're on the way out, it's a little awkward or too late, right? So
Yep. And I will admit, I did that. I did that
Yeah.
exact thing. Because I switched careers mid-flow, I had all of these recommendations from my journalism colleagues. And then I went and worked in social media for 12 years. And when I left Cargill, I had no recommendations that had anything to do with social media. And then I had to go hustle some up, right? So yes, recommendations, absolutely. Absolutely. Can be valuable because it's like a Yelp review for you, right? From a colleague. So why wouldn't you ask people to say nice things about you?
Absolutely.
And Jenny, on the hiring end, how often do you look at those LinkedIn recommendations? What type of weight do you give when you're interviewing someone? Just
I
curious.
mean, one of my old managers said the funniest thing about references: if you can't find 3 people to lie for you, you're in a bad way, And so I yes, it's Yelp, but no one's ever going to say anything bad, or if you ask somebody, that would be probably a bad choice. So I don't use those necessarily that much. I would more dig in during the references. And again, it's going to be positive, but there's a way to, ask questions about the person live, opposed to those recommendations on LinkedIn. That's just me personally.
Okay.
But still get them. Good endorsements are always good endorsements, right?
Absolutely.
And it depends on the role you're applying for, right? For me, I agree with you completely. Nobody's going to say anything negative in one of those, right? So you have to take them with a grain of salt. But for me, if I am hiring a social media professional, I just want to see that they have them. I don't really read them or care what they say. I just want to see that you know enough about this platform that you understand the functionality and you use it, right? So if you're applying for a digital social media role, having those is more just a check mark in terms of like, you get what's going on here, right?
No, absolutely. And I think there's some cachet too, if there's people who are more senior level that are saying good things about you, then that I look for that sometimes too, to see, do they have some bosses and some people above just their peers, that talk about how they manage up, how they do some of those softer skills that are harder to get at, that are good determiners of success. We have a question in the chat. How do you approach asking for recommendations when you're not looking to change jobs? If you want to keep your profile fresh, but you're like your company, how do you come across like you're not you're not looking for a job, but do it casually along the way?
The quickest, easiest way is to give someone a recommendation and then hope that they reciprocate, which they usually do, right? So do your colleague a favor that you love to work with, and make them a great recommendation. It takes all of 5 minutes to write a nice paragraph about somebody, and then ask them, would you mind writing one for me? Usually works like a charm.
All right, and I see a comment there from Celeste. Is that a question or a comment? In the past, I've asked colleagues for constructive feedback. How can I improve? Then also ask if they'd write a recommendation and reciprocate. Yeah, that's a good way to do it too. Depending on where you're at too, like I used to do this when on the agency side, after a project, after something big completed, asking to capture some of that. It's like, hey, would you do a recommendation, highlight this project, or something like that, where you can make it bound by something too. So, I guess what I would add contribution for, you're happy where you're at for now, but I think you should always be thinking about where you're headed and career progression. Now I'm on the other side of that, where I'm the boss trying to make sure everybody is on a career path and doing professional development. And, I have staff that are asking me, where am I going? What's my next step? And what I would say, for those people is that they need to be thinking through, what is it that they want to be doing? There are a lot. one thing about our career path in communications, public relations, marketing, there's so many overlapping job descriptions that with similar skill sets at the foundation that you can do a lot of different things, everything from data analysis to creative and a whole, you know, client service. And I mean, so much in between that you sort of have to have a path that you're on yourself as far as what are you actively gaining knowledge and experience in, and where do you want to be so that you don't end up in the wrong spot when you know 10 years in. And I see that. I see people who get trapped in the path, and the only way for them to correct that is to go backwards because they want to do something different that's substantially different. And so I say, you know, you should yearly, and what I always tell my team is that they should be yearly doing that at their performance review time, you know, doing some self-reflection on where am I going? Am I still on the right path? What are the gaps? You know, doing an audit, so to speak, of where I'm at in my career long before you think you need to actually start looking for a new job. Or, you know, I tell people hopefully when people are leaving, they're not running away from us. Hopefully they're running to something good. And then I'm always happy for them, you know, maybe not so happy for us if we have to replace a good person, but you know, I'm in an organization where on my team I've got like one subject matter expert in different areas, so I don't have progression. I don't have like a whole PR group that I can progress people through, and so they get to a certain point, they may have to leave to grow, and that's okay. So always being thinking about that is sort of one thing that comes to mind for me. The other thing that comes to mind for me is I think I've seen a lot of professionals get stuck because, especially in our career path, because they become really, really good at a set of tactics, but they don't think real strategically and they don't know how. And what I say, one thing you can do about that is making sure you're part of the business side of your business, not just communication side, but and typically there's a natural connection point because almost everything that an organization does ends up needing communications or communications and marketing at some point. You know, so you end up being at a center of a whole lot of activity. You know, how do you find a way to invite yourself to, you know, some of the business conversations and figure out how to add value to those from a communication standpoint? That's how you get that reputation as a strategist. That's how you build some experience, you know, consulting business leaders, because at the end of the day, if you want to be a leader, if you want to be a strategist, you know, you need to be able to connect to the business needs, not just wait to take orders. And I do see professionals that get caught, you know, because they're really, really good at media relations or really, really good at social media tactics, but they don't know how to connect it to the business needs and make recommendations that go beyond, you know, what's in front of them every day.
Knowing the business of the business is so important for your current company, for your clients. You must understand the business. And if you don't understand it, you can do internal interviews. I've sat down with many finance people and been like, can you explain this to me? How does this work? What are we doing here? Why is this? Why did we make that decision? Just interview them, ask questions, be curious, because understanding the business of the business is so important.
No, big fan of thinking about that ahead of time. And if you're not sure where to begin, I mean, it is, you know, one thing that I was fortunate to get to do when I was way back when I was trying to figure some of this out, you know, making that transition from, you know, individual contributor to more strategist in my career. And one thing that I was able to do, if you want a tip, is for an internal communications project, recommended a business basics series where we just went and interviewed every area of the company to try to articulate, you know, here's what this group does and how that contributes to the whole. Here's what this group does and how that contributes to the whole. And that was in healthcare at the time, where there's a lot of complicated groups. And, you know, knowing what medical policy does, you know, and how that works, or cost trends committee and how that works. And that got us in the door where then I started getting invited to some of their meetings once in a while. And we started doing some data mining and story, you know, telling, you know, of some of those areas that we didn't even know existed. And it just blossomed from there. So there are ways to make yourself relevant, even, you know, beyond the interviews, you know, starting to find ways to support them with the work that we do. And when, you know, typically we're the ones holding the keys to storytelling internally and externally. How we doing? I didn't look for any other questions. Were there any other questions? I don't see any more in the
Got one from Missy here.
Oh, yep, there's a new one. What
Well,
additional or different advice do you have for people who are individual consultants from a risk protection standpoint?
Yeah, so I'll take that if folks don't mind, since I'm in that bucket myself. I would say we have to be even more careful. Missy, I know you know this, but it's one of those things where I feel like when you have a company, a company the size of Cargill or smaller, kind of behind you, and you're the social media person for the company, the thing you're still most worried about is the company's reputation, right? And then secondarily, I guess, your own reputation, or maybe that should be switched. But when it's just you, and when you've done something incredibly stupid like name the company after yourself, like it's all you. It's the company's reputation is your reputation, right? It is interchangeable, it is the same, it is one thing. And so to me, my own personal standpoint is I only post PG-13 on the socials. Like, I don't post anything about politics. I don't post anything controversial. I am very buttoned down. If you are my friend on social media, I post about my dogs and puzzles and extremely boring vanilla things. But that's very, very intentional, because I am, I know that, one post can be the death of you professionally. Unfortunately, it's true now. So you just have to be even more vigilant, because your reputation is your company's reputation.
Absolutely. I think too, that's where if you're an individual consultant, that's where having those, mentors and advocates and or clients that have served you, some of those recommendations matter a lot more, I think, if they're coming from mentors and clients and things like that to those individual consultants, because I know if or testimonials on their website or whatever, because I do look at who they've worked with. And if I was looking to bring Sue, you on as a consultant, I'd be looking at those kinds of things. So who you've worked for and what they say about you would matter. Scott, anything from a legal standpoint that you can think of as a solo practitioner? Or
I think it's sort of like a baseline thing. If you're a solo consultant, like, easiest thing, don't be doing it individually. Have a company that you're doing it through that provides you some protection if something bad was to happen. I think when you're engaging with clients, make sure that you have a good agreement that sets forth the expectations and the pay and everything like that. And dealing with your clients, their confidential information, and they're going to probably want that type of protection. Your clients will, but make sure that everything is clearly set forth in a written agreement. I would also, make sure you're talking to your insurance broker and making sure that you have appropriate levels of insurance. I'm just brainstorming a potential issue here. What if someone, say like Sue's size of a company, she's got a bunch of confidential information relating to whatever big Fortune 500 company she's working for, and your computers get hacked, right? And then all of a sudden all their private information is, with the hackers or whatever, right? So, what insurance do you have to cover for that potential liability, right? So you're going to want a CGL policy. You might want a cyber policy on that.
Yep.
But those are things to be thinking about, and it's not very interesting, and it adds layers of cost, but make sure you have sort of the nuts and bolts. You have an organization that you're working with, or that you're working through. So you have like an LLC or a corporation. You've got a clear contract with all of your customers, delineating everything, and then you're protected from an insurance side if something bad was.
That's a really good point. I have a separate cyber policy for a data breach situation.
Yeah, and I can't work with anyone if they don't have an insurance policy. So, if you're in any sort of regulated industry, that's typically a requirement, but it's a Sue or a Jason or whoever would have to have an insurance policy for us to do business with them.
Pretty much any client of a notable size needs insurance. Yeah.
It's good for both sides, and it's not as expensive as you would think. I know I've actually had freelancers that we've worked with go get a policy, and I remember one of them saying that wasn't bad at all. That's totally worth it, considering what we're going to do together. And so she was fine with going and getting
a couple $100 for a year. It's not much.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Any final thoughts on you're happy, you're content? Because then we're going to get to the fun one of, you're leaving. How do you slam the door on the way out? So
softly.
Yeah.
There's
go for it. Build on that.
Yeah, there's good levers and bad levers. Be a good lever, right?
Yep.
sometimes you can't control it. But I think, I'm sure Jenny and Sue will comment on sort of from a professional way how to do it. But the big thing from like the legal end is like, before you walk out the door, make sure you understand what your situation is with your current company, right? Being like the employment agreement, the non-compete, the non-solicit, but then also like benefits. Like, when does your insurance going to stop? Do you need some type of severance, or do you need some type of medical continuation coverage, or try to negotiate that with your old employer? Do you have some type of like deferred comp or stock options that are vested or unvested, that type of stuff? Because a lot of people are just thinking about, I mean, the main goal, which is what your next opportunity is, and then they don't think about that. And so like, say with like stock options, like sometimes when you quit, like you've got a window of time to exercise your stock options, which requires a cash outlay. And sometimes people don't have that cash, and then they're losing a whole bunch of stock options. So just know everything that you currently have, and like dust off that personnel record that you haven't looked at since you started, to make sure you understand all those nuts and bolts, so that when you pull the trigger, you know what's coming.
Yeah. Even things like timing for bonuses and stuff, and bonus structures, because I've seen that here where I'm at, where somebody, announced they were leaving right before bonus was announced, even though it happens the same time every year. And then because they announced, they aren't eligible. So for it, and it's just a matter of a couple weeks that they could have, that they walked away from thousands of dollars because they timed it wrong. And
From a professional standpoint, well, kind of a plug for health and wellness. Please don't be one of the people that has your last day on a Tuesday and starts your new job on a Wednesday. Like, take some time off. Like, please, please, please do this. It's better for all the reasons. And it's so nice to close one email and not have to open up another one and just have that time in between. Like, please give that to yourself. That's my public service message. It's a really small world. And so even if you leave an agency, some of those people go to the client side or have, their own practices. And, when you see that somebody's worked, if you go into LinkedIn, you see they've worked at a company, you might reach out to somebody and say, did you work with this person? How was that experience? And so there's a lot of informal referencing that goes on as well. And so just be mindful of that. And, it's your personal brand. So how do you want your personal brand to be when you leave an organization? I think, like Scott said, know everything that you're leaving, look into the 401k, the benefits, all that good stuff. Ask those questions. And then, just by way of ticking and tying all of your projects that you're working on, if there's something that you need to leave behind for the person who's taking it over, if that hasn't been sorted out yet for you to offboard, put a document together so they know where things are. Put anything that you might have on your desktop or on a personal drive onto shared drive so people have it, just so you're helping to set your team up for success when you're gone. So it doesn't end up, you don't have to get phone calls about where things are. And they have the information they need to continue with the work. Again, setting them up for the best way possible, because that puts your personal brand in the best light.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk for an hour about this topic myself. Sorry, do you want to talk?
We have 14 minutes. No, we have 4. You don't have an hour.
My top line advice is to take a pause, whether you're leaving a company voluntarily or involuntary. Voluntarily pause. Don't post anything on social media. We have all in the last 12 months seen someone jump on LinkedIn and go, I just got my pink slip, I'm walking out the door, blah, 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 blah. And they're usually like super long posts that are full of emotion and reaction, and it's just not a good look. So when you're leaving a company, either on your own power or not, you really need to take a beat, because whatever you post on social media, either your personal social or LinkedIn, is saying a lot to your network of people that you're about to ask for a lot of help. And it's saying a lot to people that may hire you, right? I don't want an employee who's going to go out on a rant about how they were dismissed from this company. I want someone who's going to do a clean handoff and be a good leaver, right? I want someone who is going to be a professional about this, right? I mean, these are corporate decisions. People get laid off. It is unfortunate. It is painful. I've been through this, but that doesn't mean that you should then take all that pain and anger and confusion and dump it onto LinkedIn. That's pretty much the worst thing you can do. With the exception of maybe jumping on LinkedIn and bashing your boss, which is another huge no-no, right? Think about your future employer, because they're going to look at how you respond to this event online, what you post, how you say, how you carry yourself, and that may weigh into their impression of you. You know, it may also weigh into the impression of people that you may reach out to ask for help in your job search. If they see you being, you know, unprofessional, are they going to really bend over backwards to help you, right? And so when you do post on LinkedIn that, hey, I'm leaving company X and I'm looking for my next opportunity, you know, there is a way to make that post that is positive, that is professional, that is forward looking, right? You want to do that, and you don't want to be a 2-year-old in the corner having a temper tantrum, right? Not on social.
And I would say, even if you were treated poorly, which happens, all right, we've all been beaten up by, you know, somewhere in our career by in some situation. It happens, right? But how you handle that shows shows your level of emotional maturity too. You know, where even that you can be introspective and find a way to be positive and about the future. But you don't necessarily have to sing the praises and lie about how you feel, but either say nothing or just, you know, or put it in the proper perspective, because I think I interpret some of that stuff when I've seen that of, oh, this person's throwing a fit, I guess, you know. And in interviews, I've had them do that, where you're interviewing somebody and they start bad mouthing their previous employer, and I'm like, ooh, that's the reddest of red flags in an interview. It's like, yeah. Which is too bad, because you can tell they're still emotional and they're probably great. They probably needed to wait a minute before they had the interview and got that out of their system.
Right.
We're not saying don't have a response. Like, you know, sometimes those things really hurt. You need to go through the steps of grieving if, you know, for whatever reason, if you are involuntarily let go, let's say. So we're not saying don't have those reactions, but like call a friend, go out to coffee. Like there's other ways to get that out where you feel like you've been able to say it out loud or just kind of work it through without it being public. You know, if it's not posted for, you know, 1 billion of your closest friends to see, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means you're choosing a different method to express those things.
Right. And the other thing I say about career updates on LinkedIn, right? The way that LinkedIn does things is when people look at your profile, it'll say Sue worked at Cargill from 2011 to whatever it was. And, you know, it doesn't say she worked there until May 5th on that year, right? So like this impulse that you have to immediately update your network that you left your job yesterday. It doesn't matter, right? If you wait 3 months, the net effect is going to be the same. You know, I waited 4 months after I started my company to announce it, right?
Yeah.
You know, you can take your time. It's okay. So that like weird pressure you feel that you have to immediately say something is in your head.
Yeah.
And one tip on the forced departures, if you find yourself in that situation. So if someone's terminating your employment, one thing that employees sort of frequently ask for, or I offer, is like, you can resign from your position instead of being fired. And then at least you can like say when you're looking for a new job, like, I resigned from position fit or whatever, like you can sort of twist the history a little bit and gloss over it. And like most employers that I work with will be, unless if it's like a really egregious situation, like doesn't really matter to the employer. They just want you sort of gone. So that's always an option. And then just from like a legal nuts and bolts perspective, like you can ask for a copy of your personnel records. You can make sure what everything's in there. And then in Minnesota, there's something called the truthful statement of termination. So you can ask your employer for a truthful statement of termination. They have to like give you the specific reasons of why they terminated you. It's usually like a precursor to a lawsuit. Like when one of my clients gets that request, you know something's coming. But it's if you're confused as to the reason, or you think there might be something untoward about the circumstances, that's a lever you can pull to force your former employer to give you a response as to why they terminated your employment.
Well, that's great. I don't think I've ever asked for my personnel file from that's a great thought. Sorry, go ahead, Jenny.
No, I was just going to say, and you know, forward looking, when your future employers do a reference check with your former employers, usually it's just like name, rank, serial file. You know, this is where this is their title, this is the dates of employment. There's I mean, we never give commentary on the employment. And so just know that in large part, your former employers will not do that. They'll just really give, I don't know, it's everything you could find on LinkedIn. They're just verifying it. So I would say the formal references don't usually have that extra commentary.
Yeah, that's a good thought, because I've had those calls and we're not allowed to share a whole lot of, and nor do I want to spend a lot of time complaining about an employee. Which brings up, Ginger has a question. What exactly are former employers allowed to say to future prospective employers who call to verify? Are there, maybe Scott, are there legal considerations there?
Well, I mean, there's like HR confidentiality laws, so you don't want to like, they're not going to just start spouting off everything that happened. Standard advice to any employer is when the client calls, and Jenny just said it, job title and dates of employment, leave it at that. Because if you say anything else, the employer is opening himself up to a potential defamation
Okay.
claim. So like if you say this person's a horrible employee, they did X, Y, Z, blah, 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 and you disagree with their assessment of you doing X, Y, Z, then there's a false statement or there's tortious interference.
What if they're on a performance improvement plan? I've had that come up.
I mean, that
Is
happens
that
for a
something-
variety of reasons now. The job that they're
Yeah.
taking next might have nothing to do with that skill set.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
I would never want that to preclude somebody from seeking, future employment, or as I like to say, spreading their wings and being great elsewhere. Sometimes it's just a bad fit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if I'm the employer getting the call, it's dates, job title, dates of employment. That's it. That's our policy. And I think big organizations are like that. Smaller organizations, you say that rule and then they only apply it when it's negative. And then if it's positive, they'll actually give a positive reference.
Sure.
I think that happens sometimes.
Yep.
But I don't know. I wouldn't read into too much if the company just says
Mhm.
dates of employment, because that might actually be their policy.
Yeah. Well, and as somebody who's given quite a few of those, it's like, yeah, that's what I do. I mean, if they try to ask for more. Now, what about the more informal thing where we all know each other in this marketplace, right? If Dan's going to hire somebody, it's chances are that I might know him, or vice versa, or somebody that interned with Brandt, or that I might, and we'll on LinkedIn, I've seen this happen. I've done this, I'll be honest, where I've said, hey, so-and-so applied. I see you're connected to them. What do you know about them, or whatever? Are there dangers there, or is that?
Like I told my daughter yesterday, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it. Right? You're just opening yourself up to some type of defamation claim, or the person's just going to be pissed at you.
Sure.
So you just,
My rule of thumb is if you have to pause and ask, should I be posting this? The answer is no.
right, yeah.
Ooh, good one. Good rule of thumb. I like that one. All right, Betsy's asking sort of the same kind of question about a professor supervisor when asked for a reference for a student or intern. What should they say? Are there restrictions on what they should say?
There's not specific restrictions, but it's all viewed through the same lens, right? Like if you're saying something negative towards someone, there's potential ramifications because the other person might disagree with what you're saying, right? And so that applies if it's a personal reference that you're giving for one of your former colleagues, if you're an employer and you're wearing your HR hat and giving it, or if you're a professor, it's the same. You're viewing it through the same lens.
And this might go without saying, and I know a lot of people on this call will know this, but if you are putting somebody down as a reference, let them know. There's so many times we reach out to referencers and they're like, oh, they put me down.
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. And they don't even have time to prep going into it. And so it's always best if your reference is expecting the call and they know about it. So just give them a heads up.
That also seems really risky. Like if you catch someone off guard, what are they going to say off the top of their head? You know?
Well, because my response when somebody does ask is, well, here's what I think I can, confidently say. Is that the kind of thing you want, to make sure that they're comfortable with that? But if they never ask, you never know.
Well, we're in PR, so we should be giving key messages to, our
Absolutely.
exactly what we want them to say.
Absolutely. Well, and I tell people, and we all know this is true, it's like the communications that we give are actually auditioning for the jobs, right? Our effectiveness as a communicator is sort of what's in the spotlight.
Mm-hmm.
So the very act of what you put in your resume and how you prepare people, is actually part of what we do every day. All right, well, we're down to just a couple minutes here. Are there any other questions?
Can I go back to the very beginning when we talking about salary? Is there a point that's too early to communicate how much you need or how much you have to offer somebody?
I mean, in the spirit of not wasting anybody's time, your time and the recruiter's time, the company's time, if there's some expectation that you have or the candidate has, I would prefer they say it sooner than later, because if we're so off, I don't want to waste their time. And also, if there's something else that comes up down the road that they would be better suited for, I can keep them in mind without going through this long process and getting everybody involved in interviews. So, I don't think like, hi, my name is Jenny Gratz and I'm looking for X is necessarily appropriate. But that said, after you just get some information about the job before the first call wraps, I think it's okay to say, would you share what the range is for this position? I think that's fair. And like I said, a lot of states have wage transparency now. So you could Google the job title and find in New York or California and, kind of do some backwards math to figure out what appropriate range might be for the Twin Cities. So you have some idea in your mind. But I think you should ask.
Yeah. And just from a little legal update, since Minnesota's passing so many new employment laws over the last year. So last session, they passed a law saying that employers can't ask applicants what their salary is. You can offer it voluntarily.
Sure.
It sort of comes up as part of a negotiation, like they're going to have some feel for what your expectation is and they can assume what your current salary is. But an employer that you're applying to can't affirmatively just straight up ask you for it. And there's current legislation going in the current session right now for salary disclosure laws. So like if an employer posts a position, they're gonna have to post the range. And like Jenny said, a lot of other states have that right now.
Yeah, and I think that's what Ginger was asking, a related question. What if the offer's in the ballpark? Is it okay to negotiate up from that? So I think she means if it's not quite in your range, but it's close.
Yeah.
Jenny, how should they handle that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of different levers that could be pulled. It could be an increase to the base. It could be a sign-on bonus. There's a lot of different things that could be explored. So I would just remain open to some of those options. But I think when the recruiter asks, what would it take you to make a jump? What would it take you to salary-wise for you to come join us? You have that opportunity to level set what it is that you're looking for. So when you get the offer, it's not dramatically below what you're looking for.
All right, we're out of time, guys. This is a great conversation. I feel like we could keep going. So, but to answer the question that came, yes, this is being recorded, so it will be available. And I think that'll be put out on the PRSA website. If you don't have that, you can, I'm sure, email Eva Kaiser and she can make sure you have a link to it. But thank you to our panelists, Scott and Jenny and Sue. Really appreciate the expertise and time, and have a great rest of your Thursday, everybody.